Great to be back again for yet another edition of This is Culture. Today we focus on matters black representation. We live in a world that is quite unfair, unfortunately, especially in terms of the lack of and underrepresentation of black people. There's always a fuss every time a black person or those whose origins are in Africa get, for example, global accolades. As black people, no matter where we are, we celebrate this because history made a black person less important. Incompetent, because Africa has been portrayed as backward, savage, and chaotic in everything. And seeing a change in this context means a lot. A perfect example was the release of Black Panther film in February this year, the first black superhero movie with a black director and with a primarily black cast. It was a big deal for the black community, but this was just a story in Wakanda, which is a fictional country, and it's official. Black Panther 2 is on the way, impatiently waiting. But apart from the kingdom of Wakanda, we have real stories. Black people breaking boundaries and defying the odds of black stereotypes. And allow me to talk about the very recent ones, the U.S. midterm elections, in which Somalia's Ilhan Omar won the elections, becoming one of the first Muslim women elected to the U.S. Congress. Casey Palmer is a renowned blogger in Canada who passionately talks about being a black person in Canada and is always happy to educate people on his background. Thank you very much for joining us in the program, Casey.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me here.
Well, what pushed you to start addressing the issue of being black in a white-dominated country like Canada?
I feel like for a long time, we weren't being heard as much. People may have just assumed things. The problem about living in Toronto, Canada, which is our biggest city, it's 51.5% visible minorities. So white people are the minority in Toronto, but everyone just kind of assumes that everyone is cool with each other racially, when really what happens is that we still have our subsections and we have our subgroups, but no one talks about it. And I'm hoping that through these stories and through the actual conversations and dialogues we're starting up through this project, that we'll get to a point where we can really start to examine what's happening and really understand it all, because right now assumptions don't really do anyone any good.
And how has the feedback been ever since you began?
We've been able to tell stories in a more, if not only a positive light, but also with more depth and breadth to them. It's allowed us to examine things that we talk about within our community, but maybe not at large. And we never really had a forum, if you will, to really express our feelings and opinions with others. So we've started touching on things such as why we, wear certain fashions, or why we say certain things, or how we may perceive situations differently than people who aren't black.
And Casey, the issue of racism has always been a controversial issue since time immemorial. Do you think the perception is changing?
Racism hasn't gone away. It's still prevalent. In Canada, we are both, I guess, blessed and also cursed with the fact that it's a lot more subtle in most of the country here, where if you look at American news or you look at many places around the world, you'll have very overt racism that happens, whether it's ethnic cleansing, whether it's class system. There's so many things that are in your face when it comes to racism in Toronto especially, but in Canada we have a lot of discrimination and whatnot that's there, but it's very much woven under the fabric of what we do socially. And it changes its face and it changes how it presents itself to us, but we need to be aware of its existence and aware of what's happening.
And it won't be fair to end this segment without talking about yet another black achievement.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show with yours truly, people's sexiest man alive. You know what really went through my mind was, again? No, joking.
There's actually a lot of thought that goes into who is deserving of the sexiest man alive. Someone always rises to the top, and this year's no exception.
I'm Idris Elba, and I am the sexiest man alive.
Wow, the sexiest man alive. Almost everyone agrees on that, of course, not all, but yes, at least for some of us, he is the sexiest man alive. And on that note, we end this week's edition of This is Culture. Till next time, goodbye.
Bye.